Welcome to Declassified Deep Dive, where unredacted files reveal hidden truths. Let's uncover the secrets. I'm your host, Raj, and each week we explore a new secret deep dive.
All right, so today we're diving into something pretty unsettling, Project MKUltra. You probably heard of it, maybe even dismissed it as just another conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that we're not just dealing with speculation here. I mean, we've got declassified CIA documents, court testimonies, even a 60-minute segment from back in '84. It all adds up. MKUltra was a real thing.
We're talking about a quest for mind control for over 2 decades. Right through the Cold War, the CIA just poured resources into weaponizing LSD hypnosis, even electroshock therapy. They were obsessed with creating the ultimate espionage tools.
And it gets even crazier when you consider that a lot of these experiments were conducted on people who had absolutely no idea what was happening to them. We're talking about some serious ethical violations, stuff that'll make your stomach churn.
Like the story of Dr. Frank Olson, this biowarfare expert. The guy jumps from a hotel window after unknowingly being dosed with LSD. His family fought like hell to prove it wasn't suicide. They claimed that the CIA took him out.
Yeah, Olson's story is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. To really understand MKUltra, we need to go back a little bit. Back to the Cold War.
Right. The paranoia surrounding Soviet brainwashing was insane. The Korean War, all those Manchurian candidate scenarios, it really fueled this obsession with controlling minds.
The CIA was convinced they needed to develop their own mind control arsenal, to fight fire with fire. Initially, it was about defense, but it quickly morphed into something way more offensive.
And so MKUltra is born. This umbrella term for over 140 sub-projects exploring every way imaginable to mess with the mind.
The sheer range of techniques they explored is just mind-boggling. But their main focus was LSD. They were so obsessed with it that they actually tried to corner the world's supply.
Wow, so they went all in on that. Who are they dosing?
Well, CIA employees, military personnel, basically anyone they could. But what's really disturbing is they targeted regular people too, civilians who had no clue what was going on.
You mean they were giving people LSD without their knowledge or consent? That's just messed up.
Oh yeah. A former CIA agent even admitted they set up safe houses disguised as brothels. They'd dose unsuspecting guys with LSD and watch them behind two-way mirrors. They called it research, but it was incredibly shady.
Sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel. And LSD wasn't the only drug they were playing with, right? They experimented with a whole bunch of different substances.
You name it, they probably tried it. Heroin, morphine, diazepam, even stuff like mescaline and psilocybin. They wanted to explore every single psychotropic drug.
So let's talk more about this LSD obsession.
Yeah.
What exactly were they hoping to achieve with it?
Well, initially they thought LSD might be the key to creating a truth serum. You know, that mythical substance that forces people to spill their secrets?
Like something out of a spy movie. Did it work?
Not even close. LSD is unpredictable. Its effects vary wildly from one person to the next. It quickly became obvious that LSD was far from a reliable truth serum.
So what else were they aiming for with LSD?
Well, they explored its potential for wiping memories, for breaking down personalities, basically making people easier to manipulate. They also thought it could be used in interrogations to disorient and confuse people.
Sounds like they were trying to crack the code of human consciousness.
Yeah.
To control people's very thoughts and perceptions.
Exactly. And the ethical implications of that are pretty staggering. We're talking about messing with the core of what makes us human.
So LSD was a major focus, but you also mentioned hypnosis. Why was the CIA interested in that?
They saw hypnosis as a potential tool for all sorts of things, enhancing memory and learning, inducing anxiety in enemies, even improving observational skills in their own agents.
Seems like they were trying to weaponize every possible way into the human mind. What about this psychic driving technique? That sounds especially creepy.
Psychic driving was the brainchild of Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, a Scottish psychiatrist who was working in Canada. His methods were, shall we say, controversial.
How controversial?
Cameron believed he could completely reprogram people's minds using a mix of extreme electroshock therapy, drug-induced comas, and repetitive audio loops. He thought he could erase memories and install new behaviors.
That sounds terrifying. Like something out of a sci-fi horror film.
It was. Many of his patients ended up with permanent psychological damage, amnesia, confusion, even regression to a childlike state.
And this was all funded by the CIA.
Indirectly, yes. Cameron received funding through this front organization called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. He claimed he didn't know the money was coming from the CIA.
So they were intentionally trying to hide their involvement, using these layers of bureaucracy as a shield. That's pretty shady.
It was a common tactic throughout MKUltra. They used front organizations, shell corporations, anything to keep their hands clean.
You mentioned earlier these safe houses where they were drugging people without their knowledge. What can you tell us about those?
The safe houses were part of something called Project 3. They were basically secret labs where they could experiment with LSD and other drugs on unsuspecting subjects.
And who were these subjects?
Often they were people who were already vulnerable. Prostitutes, drug addicts, people who were less likely to go to the authorities. It was a blatant exploitation of marginalized communities.
That's just wrong. They were taking advantage of people who couldn't fight back or seek justice.
Exactly. And informed consent was almost never given in these experiments. The CIA's research goals were more important than the well-being and autonomy of their subjects.
It sounds like a complete disregard for basic human rights. And it's chilling to think this was happening right here in North America, often under the guise of national security.
It's a dark part of our history, one that raises serious questions about the limits of government power and the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition.
It's like a real-life conspiracy thriller. We've covered a lot of ground, but we're just scratching the surface of this twisted story. There's still so much to unpack.
Absolutely. We haven't even talked about the key players involved, people like Dr. Frank Olson or George White, the guy who ran those safe houses. And then there's the whole question of how MKUltra was eventually exposed.
I think we need to take a break here and pick up the thread in part 2 of this deep dive. I have a feeling things are about to get even more disturbing.
So yeah, picking up where we left off, let's dive into some of the people behind these mind-bending experiments. One guy who really stands out is George White, this narcotics agent with a very unusual approach to law enforcement.
We talked about White before, when we were discussing those safe houses, those covert labs disguised as brothels. What kind of guy was he to be running these operations?
White was a complicated character, to put it mildly. He had a history of personal drug use, this fascination with mind-altering substances that went way beyond his official duties. You could even say he was a rogue agent.
So he was okay with pushing the limits even when it came to experimenting on people who didn't know what was happening.
Oh yeah, White was convinced that LSD and other drugs could unlock the secrets of the mind. And his methods definitely reflected that. He didn't really care about ethics or the well-being of his subjects.
It's scary to think someone like that had so much power.
It really shows you the mindset of the times. That Cold War paranoia allowed this kind of ethically questionable research to thrive. They thought the ends justified the means, even if it meant exploiting vulnerable people.
We also mentioned Dr. Frank Olson earlier, the biowarfare expert who died after being unknowingly given LSD. His story is really haunting, especially with all the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death.
Olson's case is a perfect example of the tragic consequences of MKUltra's reckless experiments. This was a brilliant scientist working for the Army at Fort Detrick, a key location in the development of biological weapons. He got pulled into this web of intrigue, and it cost him his life.
The details of his death are chilling. 9 days after being slipped LSD at a CIA retreat, he falls from a hotel window in New York City. The official story was suicide, but a lot of people believe he was silenced by the CIA.
There's definitely evidence that points to foul play. There was a phone call from Olson's room to Dr. Harold Abramson, a big name in the CIA's LSD research, right before he died. And the CIA's own internal investigation later concluded that Olson's death was probably a homicide.
It's like something out of a spy movie. A scientist stumbles upon a dark secret, and the agency behind it does whatever it takes to shut him up.
It's a tragic reminder of the lengths that powerful institutions will go to protect their secrets. Even if it means sacrificing human lives, it makes you question the accountability of these agencies.
The Olson family did eventually get a settlement from the CIA, but they never admitted any wrongdoing. It's a hollow victory, considering the immense loss they suffered.
It highlights the challenges of seeking justice when those responsible are operating in the shadows, hidden by secrecy and protected by powerful interests.
And then there's a whole issue of the destroyed MKUltra records. Did the CIA ever face any consequences for intentionally covering up their actions?
Destroying those records was a huge blow to uncovering the full extent of what MKUltra was really about. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. He was afraid of exposure and legal repercussions. It was a blatant attempt to erase the evidence of their wrongdoing.
But some records must have survived right.
Thankfully, some did. A clerical error led to some financial documents being filed in the wrong place, so they weren't destroyed. These documents, along with the tireless work of investigative journalists and congressional committees, eventually brought MKUltra to light in the mid-1970s.
So even with their best efforts, the CIA couldn't completely bury the truth.
Right. It shows the persistence of those who wanted to expose what happened, even when facing powerful opposition.
These revelations must have been shocking to the public. I could only imagine the outrage, the sense of betrayal knowing that their own government had been conducting these unethical experiments on its citizens.
People were understandably furious. It led to major investigations like the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission. They were tasked with looking into the CIA's activities, including MKUltra.
But their investigations were limited by the missing records, right? How could they fully grasp the scope of MKUltra without access to those crucial documents?
It was a major roadblock for sure. But even with the limited information, they had their reports released in 1975 and 1976, confirmed MKUltra's existence and exposed some of its most shocking aspects: the use of unwitting subjects, the dangerous drugs, the blatant disregard for ethical oversight.
Those revelations must have started a national conversation about government overreach, about the ethics of scientific research, about finding the balance between national security and individual rights.
It was a pivotal moment in the public's perception of the CIA and its secret operations. MKUltra became a symbol of the dangers of uncontrolled government power, of the potential for abuse when secrecy takes over.
And what about the victims? Were there any attempts to get justice for them or compensate them for the harm they endured?
That's an important part of the story, and one that we'll delve into more deeply in the final part of our deep dive. The victims of MKUltra faced an uphill battle for recognition, for justice, and for healing from the trauma they experienced.
It's a reminder that the consequences of these experiments went far beyond Cold War espionage. They had a real and lasting impact on people's lives.
And the ethical questions raised by MKUltra are still relevant today. As we deal with advancements in technology, artificial intelligence, and the growing power of surveillance, we need to remember the lessons of the past, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the importance of protecting individual autonomy and freedom of thought.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one, especially as we navigate the complexities of the modern world. So let's move on to the final part of our MKUltra deep dive. We'll explore the aftermath, the long-term consequences of these experiments, and the questions that still linger today. Okay, so we've uncovered the origins of MKUltra, gone deep into those ethically questionable methods, and met some of the shadowy figures who pulled the strings of these mind control experiments. But it doesn't just end there. The impact of MKUltra stretched way beyond the secrets of the Cold War. It left broken lives and ethical questions that we're still grappling with today.
Yeah, that's the real tragedy here. You can break down the mechanics of the program, try to understand their motives, but in the end, it's the human cost that really matters.
Absolutely. We've discussed Dr. Olson's tragic fate, but he was only one of many people caught up in MKUltra's web. Many victims never even knew they were part of these experiments. They were left dealing with psychological trauma and unexplained mental health issues for years, sometimes even decades.
Just imagine the confusion, the feeling of being completely violated when you discover that your struggles, your altered perceptions, all stemmed from a government program designed to manipulate your very mind.
It's a betrayal of the worst kind. And for those who did find out about their involvement, getting justice was often a long and difficult road.
Definitely. Take the case of Dr. Cameron's patients in Canada. They went through these horrifying psychic driving experiments, subjected to extreme electroshock therapy, drug-induced comas, and those relentless audio loops. The damage was severe, leaving many with lasting psychological scars.
And they weren't the only ones. Countless others, often vulnerable people who were lured into these experiments with false promises, were left to deal with the devastating consequences.
In the late 70s and early 80s, a group of Dr. Cameron's former patients took a brave step. They filed a class action lawsuit against the CIA. It was a groundbreaking case, one of the first major attempts to hold the agency accountable for the harm caused during MKUltra.
I can't imagine the CIA was happy about that. They'd gone to such great lengths to cover up their actions, destroy evidence, and keep the whole program shrouded in secrecy.
You're absolutely right. The CIA fought back hard. They used every legal trick in the book to avoid responsibility. They claimed the Canadian government had consented to the experiments and that they couldn't be held liable for what their contractors did.
Typical bureaucratic maneuvering, passing the buck and hiding behind technicalities. But these were real people whose lives were irrevocably changed by the CIA's reckless pursuit of mind control.
It was a true David and Goliath fight, but the victims never gave up. Their determination was fueled by their need for justice and their desire to expose the truth. After years of legal battles, their case finally reached a settlement in 1988.
So in the end, they did get some measure of justice, even if it was a long and difficult journey.
The CIA agreed to pay a total of $1.25 million, which was split among the 9 plaintiffs. It wasn't nearly as much as they initially hoped for, but it was still a victory. It recognized the harm they had suffered and set a precedent for holding the CIA accountable for its actions, even if it took a long time.
It's a testament to the power of perseverance, of people standing up to powerful institutions and demanding recognition for the wrongs they suffered. But the impact of MKUltra reaches far beyond the courtroom and the individual victims. It's seeped into our culture, fueling our fascination with mind control and conspiracy theories that continue to this day.
MKUltra has become this cultural icon. Its influence can be seen in books, movies, TV shows, even video games. It's often portrayed as this shadowy, all-powerful force that can manipulate minds and control destinies.
And while those fictionalized accounts often take liberties with the truth, they tap into a very real fear. The fear of unseen forces controlling our thoughts and actions.
You're right, MKUltra plays on our deepest anxieties about losing our autonomy. The possibility of having our minds hijacked, our very identities manipulated by forces beyond our control.
And these fears aren't just limited to fiction. We live in a time of incredible technological advancements. With sophisticated surveillance systems, artificial intelligence, and algorithms designed to influence our behavior, the line between science fiction and reality is getting blurrier all the time.
That's true. MKUltra serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of control, the manipulation of the human mind, isn't just a relic of the Cold War. It's a constant temptation, something we always need to be wary of.
So where do we go from here? What lessons can we take away from this dark chapter in our history? How can we make sure the mistakes of the past don't become the nightmares of the future?
I think the first thing is to acknowledge the past, to confront those uncomfortable truths and learn from them. MKUltra was a clear violation of human rights, a testament to the dangers of unchecked power and uncontrolled ambition. We need to hold those responsible accountable and make sure something like this never happens again.
Transparency and oversight are absolutely essential. We can't let our institutions operate in secrecy. Conducting their business behind closed doors, we have to demand accountability from our leaders and empower individuals to speak out against injustice.
And maybe most importantly, we need to cultivate a healthy sense of skepticism, a critical awareness of the things that try to influence our minds, our choices, our perceptions. The fight for the human mind isn't over, and it's up to each of us to be vigilant to protect our economy and to resist any attempt to manipulate our thoughts and beliefs.
MKUltra might be a thing of the past, but its impact is still felt today. It reminds us that freedom is fragile, control is seductive, and we all have a responsibility to protect the sanctity of the human mind. Let this deep dive be a call to action, a reminder to never take our freedoms for granted, to question those in power, and to fiercely defend our right to think and act for ourselves.